London, 1817. The chandeliers blazed like constellations above the most influential heads in England. The annual Hartington Ball had commenced, and with it, the beginning of another season filled with ambition, scandal, and the eternal pursuit of advantageous matches. Among the glittering dresses and rehearsed laughter stood the Duke of Westmoreland, observing the proceedings with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for a torture session. His immaculate evening attire and imposing height made him impossible to miss, though many a hopeful mother had noted with increasing despair his absolute disinterest in their carefully presented daughters. Alexander James Blackwood, the 6th Duke of Westmoreland, had sworn never to love. Love was foolishness, he insisted, a dangerous distraction for a man with title, fortune, and reputation to protect. His parents' catastrophic marriage had taught him that lesson all too well. Yet fate, always mocking, had other designs this evening. "Your Grace, you appear as though you'd rather be anywhere else," came a gentle voice to his right. Perhaps facing down Napoleon's army might be preferable? He turned, prepared to offer some practiced pleasantry, when the words died in his throat. Lady Victoria Pembroke stood before him, a vision in pale blue silk that complemented eyes the color of a summer storm. The most anticipated debutante of the season, beautiful, spirited, and absolutely unattainable. "I find large gatherings tedious, Lady Victoria," he replied, recovering his composure, "though I suspect my preference for solitude makes me poor company at such events." "On the contrary," she said, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth, "in a room full of gentlemen desperate to impress, your honesty is refreshing." While other gentlemen competed for her attention with compliments and flowers, the Duke chose a different tactic. He simply observed her. He noticed that she preferred lemonade to champagne, that she concealed boredom with polite smiles, that she averted her gaze whenever the subject of marriage arose. And it was through this attention to detail and subtle gestures that he began, unwittingly, to win her over. "They're watching us again," Victoria whispered during their third dance of the evening. "Let them watch," he replied, his hand firm against the small of her back. People with empty lives fill them with gossip about others. What neither of them realized was that the whispers had already begun. The Duke and Lady Victoria, Lady Whistledown's society papers would report the next morning. An unlikely pair, or perhaps the most sensible match of the season? This author wonders what draws our most notorious marriage-averse bachelor to the season's incomparable. One must ask, is the Duke of Westmoreland finally ready to surrender his heart? Or is Lady Victoria simply the latest distraction in a long line of fleeting amusements? By the time the paper circulated through drawing rooms across Mayfair, the damage was done. And somewhere in London, behind a desk piled with correspondence and a teacup gone cold with neglect, sat Lady Agatha Pembroke, Victoria's aunt and guardian, formulating a plan that would ensure her niece's future and destroy any chance of happiness the young woman might have found with the Duke. For Lady Agatha had secrets about Victoria that, should they escape into society's vicious rumor mill, would make even the most rebellious of dukes think twice about association with the Pembroke name. As dawn broke over London's rooftops, the players in this season's greatest drama prepared to take their positions, unaware that hearts sworn never to love were often the most vulnerable to its power. Victoria Pembroke had always known her place in the world was precarious. As the daughter of a disgraced earl who had gambled away his fortune before drowning in the Thames, whether by accident or design remained a subject of whispered speculation, she had become the reluctant ward of her father's sister, Lady Agatha. The arrangement was hardly born of familial affection. Lady Agatha had made it abundantly clear that taking in her brother's orphaned daughter was merely a duty, one she expected to be repaid through a brilliant match that would restore some semblance of prestige to the Pembroke name. "You look distracted this morning," Lady Agatha observed over breakfast, her shrewd eyes missing nothing as Victoria pushed her eggs around the plate. "I hope you aren't dwelling on last night's conversation with the Duke of Westmoreland. He is known to be charming, but utterly without intention." Victoria set down her fork. "We merely talked about books, Aunt. He has read Wordsworth. Men will pretend interest in all manner of tedious subjects when pursuing a beautiful woman, Lady Agatha replied, adding with calculated casualness, "Though I should warn you, the Duke's reputation with women is somewhat colored. I wasn't aware." "Of course not, dear. You're too innocent for such knowledge, but I hear he keeps a mistress in Chelsea and another in Bath." Lady Agatha sipped her tea. A man with his appetites could never be satisfied with one woman, no matter how accomplished. Victoria felt her cheeks flame. She had heard rumors of the Duke's cold heart, but nothing of this nature. Could she have misread him so completely? Across London, in his immaculately appointed study, the Duke was engaged in a similar conversation, though with a decidedly different tone. "You danced with Lady Victoria Pembroke 3 times last night," Lord Simon Ellery, the Duke's closest friend since their days at Eton, observed as he lounged in a leather chair. "The gossips will have you engaged by noon." Alexander didn't look up from his correspondence. "Lady Victoria is intelligent and doesn't simper. It makes a refreshing change." "She's also the niece of Lady Agatha Pembroke," Simon said, his voice dropping. "A woman who would sell her own mother if it secured her position in society. Lady Agatha's character flaws are hardly Lady Victoria's responsibility." Simon leaned forward. "There are rumors about the girl's mother." At this, Alexander's quill paused. "What sort of rumors?" "That she wasn't just your garden variety adulteress. Some say she was involved with a French spy during the war. That's why the old Earl sent her away to that remote estate in Scotland, where she eventually died." "Gossip," Alexander dismissed, though a shadow crossed his features. "And even if true, hardly relevant to Lady Victoria's character." "Perhaps," Simon conceded, "but in our world the sins of the mother most certainly visit upon the daughter. You of all people should understand that." The Duke's jaw tightened. His own mother's scandalous affairs had been the subject of vicious tongue gossip for years before her death, leaving a young Alexander to rebuild the family's reputation through impeccable, if cold, propriety. "I have no romantic intentions toward Lady Victoria," he said firmly. "My interest is merely intellectual." Simon laughed. "My dear Duke, no man in the history of mankind has ever been drawn to a beautiful woman for purely intellectual reasons." Later that afternoon, Victoria found herself in the lending library, seeking refuge among books rather than people. She reached for a volume of poetry on a high shelf. "Allow me," came a deep voice as a strong arm extended past her, effortlessly retrieving the book. She turned to find the Duke standing closer than propriety allowed, his usually impassive face softened by what might have been amusement. "Your Grace," she said, stepping back. "I didn't expect to encounter anyone here. The library is usually deserted during the season. I find books far better company than most people," he replied, examining the volume before handing it to her. "Blake, a passionate choice for a young lady. Do you disapprove?" "On the contrary, I admire a mind that seeks substance over frivolity." His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "Though I confess, Lady Victoria, you surprise me at every turn." Victoria clutched the book to her chest, suddenly aware of how alone they were among the dusty shelves. "My aunt says you keep a mistress in Chelsea." The words escaped before she could contain them, and Victoria immediately wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. To her astonishment, the Duke laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his stern features into something altogether more dangerous to her composure. "Your aunt is woefully misinformed. I have no mistress in Chelsea." His eyes sparkled with mischief. "Bath, however." Victoria's eyes widened in shock before she caught the teasing in his expression. "You're mocking me." "Gently, perhaps." He stepped closer. "Does it matter to you, whether I keep mistresses?" "It shouldn't," she answered honestly. "We are merely acquaintances." "Are we? I thought after 3 dances and a discussion of Wordsworth, we might claim friendship at least." Before she could respond, the library door opened, revealing Lady Agatha's pinched expression. "Victoria, here you are. Lord Harrington has called and is waiting in the drawing room." Her eyes narrowed at the Duke. "Your Grace, I wasn't aware you frequented lending libraries." "I'm full of surprises, Lady Agatha," he replied smoothly, "much like your niece." As Victoria was led away, she glanced back to find the Duke watching her, his expression unreadable. She couldn't know that in that moment, as he stood surrounded by the smell of leather and paper, Alexander Blackwood felt the first crack appear in the fortress he'd built around his heart. Nor could she know that, across town, a letter was being delivered to her aunt's home. A letter containing revelations about Victoria's parentage that would shake the foundations of London society and threaten any connection forming between her and the Duke of Westmoreland. The game was afoot, and the players were moving into position for the next act in London's greatest drama of the season. Rain lashed against the windows of Westmoreland House as Alexander paced the length of his study, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. 3 days had passed since his encounter with Lady Victoria in the library, and despite his best efforts, he found himself unable to banish her from his thoughts. "This is precisely why I avoid entanglements," he muttered to the empty room. "Distraction. Inconvenient, unwelcome distraction." A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. His butler entered, bearing a silver tray with a single envelope. "An invitation from the Countess of Harrington, Your Grace, for her masquerade ball tomorrow evening." Alexander took the invitation with little interest until he noticed the small, elegant handwriting in the corner. "Lady Victoria will perform at the pianoforte at 9 o'clock. His fingers tightened on the card. "Send word that I will attend." "Very good, Your Grace." If the butler found anything unusual in his master's sudden enthusiasm for a social event, his impassive face revealed nothing. Left alone again, Alexander moved to the window, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. What was it about Lady Victoria that had penetrated his carefully constructed defenses? She was beautiful, certainly, but London was full of beautiful women. Intelligent, yes, but he had known many intelligent women without feeling this unsettling awareness. Perhaps it was the vulnerability she tried so hard to conceal, the quiet dignity with which she navigated a society that judged her by her father's disgrace and her lack of fortune. Or perhaps it was simply the way she looked at him, not as the powerful Duke of Westmoreland, but as a man who might understand her love of poetry. Across town, in the considerably less grand but still respectable townhouse of Lady Agatha Pembroke, Victoria sat at her small desk, penning a letter to her childhood friend in the country. "The season progresses much as you might expect, dearest Emma," she wrote. A parade of eligible gentlemen presented by their ambitious mothers, each more determined than the last to secure a titled husband. "Aunt Agatha has set her sights on Lord Harrington for me, a pleasant enough man, if one doesn't mind conversation limited entirely to horses and hunting." Victoria paused, her pen hovering over the paper. Should she mention the Duke? The strange, thrilling tension that seemed to vibrate between them whenever they were near? The way his rare smile transformed his austere face into something that made her heart beat erratically? No. Some feelings were too new, too fragile to commit to paper. A sharp rap on her bedroom door startled her. "Victoria, I must speak with you immediately." Lady Agatha's voice brooked no refusal. Setting aside her letter, Victoria opened the door to find her aunt clutching a folded newspaper, her face ashen. "What's happened?" "Disaster," Lady Agatha hissed, thrusting the paper forward. "Lady Whistledown has all but announced an attachment between you and the Duke of Westmoreland." Victoria scanned the offending paragraph, her cheeks heating as she read the speculation about their intellectual connection and meaningful glances observed at the lending library. "It's nothing but gossip, Aunt. The Duke and I are barely acquaintances." "Barely acquaintances don't seclude themselves in libraries for private conversations." Lady Agatha paced the small bedroom. This could ruin everything. Lord Harrington was on the verge of making an offer. Why would he proceed when society believes you've set your cap for a duke? "I've done no such thing," Victoria protested. Lady Agatha stopped pacing, her expression calculating. "No matter. We can still salvage this situation. You will publicly snub the Duke at the Harrington masquerade tomorrow. Make it clear to everyone that there is no attachment." Victoria felt her stomach twist. That would be unconscionably rude. More rude than leading on a man who has sworn never to marry. The Tun knows his history, Victoria. His parents' marriage was a catastrophe of infidelities and public humiliations. The man has vowed to remain unwed. He has never spoken to me of marriage, Victoria said quietly. Of course not. He merely dallies with you because you're novel, a beauty with a brain. Once the novelty wears off, he'll discard you, and your reputation will be in tatters. Lady Agatha softened her tone, taking Victoria's hands. My dear, I only want what's best for you. Lord Harrington can offer security, respectability. The Duke offers nothing but heartbreak. Victoria withdrew her hands, turning to the window to hide the emotion in her eyes. I understand, Aunt. I'll make my disinterest clear tomorrow evening. Excellent, Lady Agatha said, satisfied. Now, about your performance. I've selected Mozart. Nothing too passionate or revealing. After her aunt departed, Victoria remained at the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. The same rain that fell on Westmoreland House across town, where a duke stared out at the identical dreary London sky. Neither could know that their fates were being manipulated by forces beyond their control. For in a small, nondescript house in Bloomsbury, a man sat composing a letter that contained information so explosive it would shake the foundations of Victoria's world and test the Duke's vow against love beyond all measure. The masquerade ball approached, and with it, secrets waiting to be unmasked. The Harrington masquerade blazed with hundreds of candles, casting golden light over a sea of feathered masks and jewel-toned silks. Victoria, dressed in a gown of deep emerald that transformed her eyes to the color of a forest at dusk, adjusted her half-mask of silver filigree, and took a steadying breath. Remember what we discussed, Lady Agatha whispered urgently beside her. If the Duke approaches, you must be polite but distant. Lord Harrington is watching. Indeed, Lord Harrington, a pleasant, if somewhat dull gentleman of 35, with a receding hairline and excellent prospects, hovered nearby, his admiration for Victoria evident in his eager expression. I haven't forgotten, Aunt, Victoria replied, her eyes scanning the crowd despite her best intentions. She found him immediately, as though some invisible thread connected them across the ballroom. The Duke of Westmoreland cut an imposing figure even in a gathering of London's elite. Unlike many gentlemen who had embraced the spirit of the masquerade with elaborate costumes, he wore a simple black mask that accentuated the sharpness of his cheekbones and the intensity of his gaze. That gaze found hers across the room, and Victoria felt the air leave her lungs. For one unguarded moment, something raw and honest passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the connection they both felt despite their better judgment. Then Lady Agatha nudged her sharply, and Victoria tore her eyes away. "Lord Harrington approaches," her aunt hissed. "Smile, dear." Victoria summoned a pleasant expression as Lord Harrington bowed before her. "Lady Victoria, you look enchanting this evening. Might I claim the first dance?" "You're most kind, my lord," she replied, accepting his arm. As they took their positions for the quadrille, Victoria couldn't help but notice the Duke watching from the edge of the dance floor, his expression unreadable behind his mask. "I understand you're to perform later," Lord Harrington said as they moved through the figures of the dance. "I look forward to it immensely. I'm told you play divinely." "You're very generous," Victoria replied automatically, her mind elsewhere, "though I fear my talents are modest at best." Such charming humility. "It's one of the many qualities I admire in you." Victoria smiled politely, though inwardly she wondered if Lord Harrington would find her fondness for Blake's poetry quite so charming. Somehow she doubted it. Across the ballroom, Alexander accepted a glass of champagne from a footman, his eyes never leaving Victoria's graceful form as she danced with Lord Harrington. The sight provoked an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, something dangerously close to jealousy. "You're staring," came Simon's amused voice beside him. "Not very subtle for a man who claims mere intellectual interest." Alexander scowled beneath his mask. "I'm observing. There's a difference." "Of course there is," Simon replied, unconvinced. "And what do your observations tell you about Lady Victoria and Lord Harrington?" "That she's bored senseless, but too kind to show it." Alexander took a swallow of champagne. The man has the conversational depth of a puddle. Simon laughed. Unlike yourself, of course, with your Wordsworth and Blake. I don't discuss poetry to impress women, Alexander said stiffly. No, you discuss it because you genuinely enjoy it, which makes you even more dangerous to a bookish young lady with romantic notions. Alexander turned to his friend, his expression hardening. You think I'm toying with her. I think, Simon said carefully, that you don't recognize what's happening to you. I've known you since we were boys, Alexander. I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her. Before Alexander could respond, the music ended. He watched as Lord Harrington escorted Victoria back to her aunt, his hand lingering perhaps a moment too long on hers. Something shifted in Alexander's chest, a decision forming before he fully recognized it. Excuse me, he said to Simon, setting down his glass. He moved through the crowd with purpose, ignoring the whispers that followed in his wake. Lady Agatha saw him coming and straightened, her hand moving protectively to Victoria's arm. Your Grace, she said with a brittle smile. What a pleasant surprise. Alexander bowed slightly. Lady Agatha, Lady Victoria. Victoria met his eyes briefly before dropping her gaze. Good evening, Your Grace. An awkward silence fell, broken only when Lord Harrington returned with refreshments. Westmoreland, Harrington acknowledged with a nod. Didn't expect to see you here. Not generally one for these frivolous affairs, are you? I made an exception when I heard Lady Victoria would be performing, Alexander replied smoothly. Victoria's head snapped up, her eyes wide behind her mask. Lady Agatha's smile tightened. How flattering, though I fear Victoria's modest talents hardly warrant such attention from a man of your discriminating tastes. On the contrary, Alexander said, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. I find genuine talent, however modest, infinitely more appealing than empty accomplishments performed for show. The implication hung in the air between them. Lord Harrington shifted uncomfortably. Lady Victoria, Alexander continued, might I claim your next dance? Before Victoria could respond, Lady Agatha interjected. I'm afraid Victoria's dance card is full this evening, Your Grace, and she must conserve her energy for her performance. Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Another time, perhaps. As he turned to leave, Victoria found her voice. Your Grace. He paused, looking back at her. Perhaps you might turn the pages for me during my performance. If you truly wish to hear me play. Lady Agatha's fingers dug into Victoria's arm, but she ignored them, her eyes fixed on the Duke's face. A slow smile spread across his features, genuine, warm, transforming. It would be my honor, Lady Victoria. As he walked away, Lady Agatha turned to Victoria, her expression thunderous. What were you thinking? We agreed. We agreed I would be polite but distant, Victoria interrupted with uncharacteristic firmness. I have been polite, but I will not be rude to a man who has shown me nothing but kindness and respect. Lord Harrington cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps I should fetch more lemonade. As he retreated, Lady Agatha leaned close to Victoria's ear. You're playing a dangerous game, niece. Remember what I told you about the Duke's history, about his vow never to marry. You've made your opinions quite clear, Aunt, Victoria replied. But I wonder, has the Duke himself ever confirmed this vow to you? Or is it merely another piece of gossip you've collected? Lady Agatha's eyes narrowed. You're becoming impertinent. This season has gone to your head. No, Victoria said quietly. I believe I'm finally finding my voice. Across the ballroom, Simon joined Alexander by a pillar. Well, what happened? Alexander's eyes followed Victoria as she moved through the crowd. I'm turning pages for her performance. Simon raised an eyebrow. How scandalously intimate. Mock if you will, Alexander replied. But for the first time in years, I find myself intrigued. Intrigued? Simon echoed. Is that what we're calling it now? But Alexander wasn't listening. His attention had been caught by a commotion at the entrance to the ballroom. A messenger had arrived, speaking urgently to Lady Harrington, who then summoned Lady Agatha with a discreet gesture. As Lady Agatha received whatever message had been delivered, her face drained of color. Her eyes sought Victoria across the room, filled with something like panic. "Something's wrong," Alexander murmured. He watched as Lady Agatha hurried to Victoria's side, whispering urgently in her ear. Victoria's expression shifted from confusion to shock, her hand flying to her throat. Without thinking, Alexander moved toward them, arriving just as Lady Agatha was insisting they leave immediately. "Is something amiss?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Victoria looked up at him, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears behind her mask. I'm afraid I must withdraw from this evening's festivities, Your Grace, including my performance." "Are you unwell?" "A family matter," Lady Agatha cut in sharply. "Nothing that need concern you, Your Grace." But Alexander's eyes remained on Victoria. "Is there anything I can do?" For a moment Victoria seemed about to speak, to reach for the lifeline he offered. Then she straightened her shoulders and shook her head. "You're very kind, but no. Please excuse us." As they turned to leave, Victoria glanced back once, her eyes meeting his with such naked vulnerability that Alexander felt something shift irrevocably within him. Whatever vow he had made against love was beginning to crumble, and he was powerless to shore up the defenses that had protected him for so long. Unknown to both of them, the letter that had caused such distress, delivered by a messenger who had vanished into the night as quickly as he had appeared, contained revelations about Victoria's parentage that would soon become the scandal of the season. For the secret that Lady Agatha had guarded so carefully was about to explode into public view, threatening not only Victoria's prospects, but the growing connection between her and the Duke that neither could deny any longer. The scandal broke like a summer storm, swift, violent, and leaving destruction in its wake. By noon the following day, Lady Whistledown's society papers had been delivered to every significant household in London, its front page devoted entirely to the shocking revelation concerning Lady Victoria Pembroke's parentage. "It appears," the anonymous author wrote, with barely concealed delight, "that the late Countess of Pembroke's indiscretions extended beyond mere adultery. Sources reveal that Lady Victoria herself may be the product of the Countess's liaison with a French diplomat during the height of the war, a man later revealed to be a spy for Napoleon. One wonders if Lady Victoria's guardian, the ever-resourceful Lady Agatha, has been aware of this scandalous lineage all along. More concerning still, what gentleman of good breeding would align himself with a bloodline tainted by both enemy sympathies and treason? Alexander crushed the paper in his fist, his knuckles white with fury. "Malicious gossip," he snarled to Simon, who sat across from him in the study of Westmoreland House, without a shred of evidence. "Evidence matters little in the court of society," Simon replied grimly. "The damage is done." "Who would spread such a tale? And why now?" Simon hesitated. "There are whispers that Lady Agatha received a letter at the Harrington masquerade, a letter that sent them fleeing the ball." "Blackmail," Alexander concluded, his mind racing. "Someone threatened to expose this story unless—" "Unless what?" Alexander paced the length of the study. "Lady Agatha has been pushing Victoria toward Lord Harrington with unusual determination. Perhaps someone wished to derail that match. Or perhaps," Simon suggested carefully, "someone wished to ensure Victoria could never aim higher than Harrington. Someone who noticed her growing connection with a certain duke, perhaps." Alexander stopped pacing. "You think this is aimed at me? To prevent an attachment between Victoria and myself? You're one of the most eligible bachelors in England. Your interest in Lady Victoria, however intellectual you claim it to be, has been noted. And there are many who would go to extraordinary lengths to prevent a woman of questionable parentage from becoming a duchess." The Duke stared out the window, his expression hardening. "I need to see her." "Alexander, think carefully. Associating yourself with Lady Victoria now, in the midst of this scandal." "I don't give a damn about scandal," Alexander interrupted, surprising both his friend and himself with the vehemence in his voice. "I need to know she's all right." Across town, in the Pembroke townhouse, Victoria sat motionless by the window, Lady Whistledown's damning words swimming before her eyes. The Morning Post had brought a flurry of cancellations, invitations mysteriously withdrawn, morning calls suddenly postponed. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from one of the season's most admired debutantes to its most notorious pariah. "It's unconscionable," Lady Agatha fumed, pacing the drawing room. "To publish such accusations without proof. Your mother may have had her flaws, but to suggest, to imply—" "Is it true?" Victoria asked quietly, her voice steady, despite the turmoil within. Lady Agatha stopped pacing. "What?" "Is it true?" Victoria repeated, looking up at her aunt with clear eyes. "Am I the daughter of a French spy?" "Don't be absurd. Your father was the Earl of Pembroke." "That doesn't answer my question, Aunt." Lady Agatha's expression tightened. "This is hardly the time for such inquiries. We must focus on damage control. Lord Harrington has already sent a note expressing his regrets." "His regrets," Victoria echoed hollowly. "He no longer wishes to court me. Men are weak creatures, easily swayed by public opinion." Lady Agatha sat heavily on the settee. "But all is not lost. With time, this scandal will fade. We'll retreat to the country estate, return next season. To try again with some other gentleman willing to overlook my tainted blood for the right price?" Victoria stood, a new resolve strengthening her spine. "No, Aunt. I won't be traded like damaged goods." "Don't be dramatic, Victoria. You have no fortune, no standing of your own. Marriage is your only security. Then I shall find employment. As a governess, perhaps, or a companion." Lady Agatha laughed bitterly. "No respectable household would hire you now, not with this cloud hanging over your name." A sharp knock at the door interrupted their argument. Moments later, the maid appeared, her expression anxious. "The Duke of Westmoreland is here, my lady. He insists on seeing Lady Victoria." Lady Agatha rose, adjusting her posture. "Tell His Grace that Lady Victoria is indisposed." "No," Victoria countered, surprising herself with her firmness. "Show His Grace in." "Victoria!" Lady Agatha hissed. "Have you taken leave of your senses? To receive a gentleman caller in the midst of a scandal? It will only fuel the gossip. I believe His Grace deserves the courtesy of an explanation," Victoria replied. "He was kind enough to show interest in my performance last night. I owe him the truth of why I withdrew." Before Lady Agatha could object further, the door opened and Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Westmoreland, strode in. His expression softened visibly at the sight of Victoria, though he maintained perfect composure as he bowed to both ladies. "Lady Agatha, Lady Victoria, forgive my intrusion at such an hour." Lady Agatha's curtsy was stiff. "Your Grace, as you might imagine, this is hardly a convenient time for social calls." "This is not a social call," he replied, his eyes moving to Victoria. "I came to offer my support." Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, but Lady Agatha stepped between them. "While your gesture is appreciated, Your Grace, you must understand that associating with us at this moment could damage your own reputation. The Ton has a long memory for scandals, particularly those involving foreign entanglements." "I'm well aware of society's petty judgments," Alexander replied coolly. "I've been subject to them myself. My concern is for Lady Victoria's well-being, not the wagging tongues of gossips." "Nevertheless," Lady Agatha pressed, "perhaps it would be best if—" "Aunt," Victoria interrupted gently but firmly, "might I speak with the Duke alone? Just for a moment." Lady Agatha's eyes widened in shock. "Absolutely not. It would be most improper, especially under the circumstances." "We'll keep the door open," Victoria said, "and you may wait in the adjoining room." After a moment of tense silence, Lady Agatha relented with poor grace. "5 minutes," she said tersely. "Not a moment more." When she had withdrawn to the next room, leaving the door conspicuously ajar, Victoria turned to Alexander, her composure finally faltering. "Your Grace, I must apologize for involving you in this unpleasantness. Your concern is most kind, but Lady Agatha is right. Association with me can only harm your standing." Alexander moved closer, lowering his voice. "Do you truly believe I care about such things?" "You should," she whispered. "Your position, your responsibilities—" "My position gives me the freedom to choose my own associations," he interrupted, "and I choose to stand by you, Lady Victoria." She looked up at him in wonder. "Why would you do that? We barely know each other." Alexander hesitated, seeming to struggle with words that did not come easily to him. I believe that sometimes one recognizes a kindred spirit, a mind that thinks as one's own does, a soul that—" He stopped, shaking his head slightly. "Forgive me. I'm not skilled at expressing such sentiments." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "You express them beautifully, Your Grace." "Alexander," he said quietly, "when we're alone, or as alone as your aunt allows, I would like you to call me Alexander." A small smile touched her lips. "Alexander." His name and her voice seemed to affect him deeply. He drew a breath, then asked, "What will you do now?" "Lady Agatha suggests retreat to the country until the scandal fades. A sensible plan, I suppose." "And is that what you want?" Victoria's gaze dropped. "What I want has rarely factored into the decisions made about my life." With gentle fingers beneath her chin, Alexander tilted her face up to meet his eyes. Perhaps it's time that changed. The intensity of his gaze sent a tremor through her. "What are you suggesting?" Before he could answer, Lady Agatha reappeared, her expression making it clear that their time was up. "I fear I must insist on concluding this visit, Your Grace. Victoria needs rest after the shock of these malicious rumors." Alexander stepped back, once again the perfect gentleman. "Of course, Lady Agatha. I've taken enough of your time." He turned to Victoria, taking her hand and bowing over it. As his lips brushed her knuckles, a touch that sent warmth cascading through her, he pressed something into her palm. "Lady Victoria, I hope to call again soon, if you'll permit it." When he had gone, Victoria uncurled her fingers to reveal a small folded note. Opening it with trembling hands, she read, "Tomorrow, noon, the secluded bench in Hyde Park, near the willow tree. I have a proposition that may offer a solution to your predicament. A." Victoria quickly tucked the note into her sleeve, her heart racing with equal parts trepidation and hope. Whatever Alexander's proposition might be, she knew with sudden clarity that it represented a turning point, not just in this season of scandal, but in the very course of her life. And for the first time since the scandal broke, Victoria felt something other than despair. She felt the stirring of possibility. Hyde Park at noon was surprisingly quiet, the usual parade of fashionable carriages notably absent. Victoria, having slipped away during her aunt's midday rest with the help of her loyal lady's maid, made her way along the gravel path toward the secluded bench Alexander had mentioned. Her plain blue walking dress and modest bonnet were chosen deliberately to avoid attention, though she feared her racing pulse might betray her even from a distance. What she was doing, meeting a gentleman alone, without chaperone, would complete her social ruin should anyone discover it. Yet somehow, that thought brought more liberation than fear. When one has already fallen from grace, the terror of falling further diminishes considerably. She spotted him before he saw her, a tall figure in a dark coat, standing with his back to the path as he gazed out at the small pond. The sight of him caused her steps to falter momentarily. Was she being foolish? Placing trust in a man she barely knew simply because he had shown her kindness when others turned away? As if sensing her presence, Alexander turned, his serious expression warming as his eyes found hers. "You came," he said simply when she reached him, the relief in his voice unmistakable. "I almost didn't," Victoria admitted. "What we're doing is scandalous." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I believe that ship has sailed, Lady Victoria." Despite everything, she found herself smiling in return. "I suppose it has. Though meeting like this risks your reputation as well as mine." Alexander gestured to the bench. "Shall we sit?" When they were settled, a proper distance apart despite their improper meeting, Victoria turned to him expectantly. "Your note mentioned a proposition." He nodded, suddenly serious. Before I explain, I need to ask you something of great importance. The rumors about your parentage, do you know if there's any truth to them? Victoria's hands tightened in her lap. I asked my aunt the same question. She evaded answering directly, which suggests there might be some truth to the matter. Perhaps? Victoria looked up at him, a challenge in her gaze. Would it matter to you if there was? Alexander considered her question with the gravity it deserved. The actions of your parents, whoever they may have been, are not yours. You cannot be held accountable for circumstances of birth over which you had no control. A surprisingly progressive view for a duke, Victoria observed. I've had considerable experience with being judged for my parents' actions, he replied, a shadow crossing his features. My mother's indiscretions were legendary. For years after her death, I was viewed with suspicion, as though infidelity might be inherited like the color of one's eyes. Victoria's expression softened with understanding. That's why you've sworn never to marry, because of your parents' unhappy union. Alexander looked surprised. You've heard that about me? Lady Agatha made quite certain I knew of your reputation as London's most determined bachelor. Did she? A muscle worked in his jaw. How convenient for her narrative. Is it untrue, then? Alexander gazed out at the pond, where a pair of swans glided across the still water. I did once make such a vow. After watching my father drink himself into an early grave, broken by my mother's betrayals, I decided marriage was a risk I couldn't afford to take. And now? Victoria asked softly. His eyes returned to hers, intense and searching. Now I find myself questioning assumptions I've held for years. Which brings me to my proposition. Victoria's heart began to race. Yes? Alexander turned to face her fully. Lady Victoria, I believe I may have a solution to our mutual predicament. Our predicament? You require protection from scandal and security for your future. He hesitated, then continued with careful precision. I find myself in need of a duchess who values substance over frivolity and possesses the courage to defy convention. Victoria stared at him, certain she had misheard. Are you proposing marriage, Your Grace? I am suggesting an arrangement, he clarified. A union of mutual benefit and respect. You would have the protection of my name and title. I would have a partner of intelligence and character. But not love, Victoria said quietly. Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or an emotion he wasn't ready to name. I believe respect and friendship are a more solid foundation than the fleeting passion poets call love. Victoria stood abruptly, needing distance to clear her head. You offer me a business transaction disguised as marriage. Alexander rose as well, his expression troubled. I offer you honesty, Victoria, and choice, something I suspect has been in short supply in your life. Choice? She laughed without humor. What choice do I have, truly? Accept your arrangement or face social exile and poverty. That's not. No, she interrupted, her voice strengthening. I refuse to enter a marriage of convenience, no matter how elegantly presented. I may have lost my standing and prospects, but I still have my heart, and I will not surrender it to a man who's already decided it has no value. Alexander stepped toward her, frustration evident in the tense line of his shoulders. You misunderstand me. I hold your heart in the highest esteem. It's my own I seek to protect. By offering me everything but the one thing that matters most? Victoria shook her head sadly. You're still letting your parents' failures dictate your future, Alexander. Still hiding behind that wall you've built. His expression hardened. And you're allowing romantic notions to blind you to practical realities. Perhaps I am, she conceded. But I would rather face those realities alone than pretend contentment in a half-marriage with a man who refuses to risk his heart. They stood in tense silence, the distance between them far greater than the few steps that physically separated them. Finally, Alexander spoke, his voice carefully controlled. I see I've offended you. That was never my intention. You haven't offended me, Victoria replied softly. You've disappointed me. I thought you, of all people, would understand that some risks are worth taking. Before he could respond, a voice called out across the park, "Lady Victoria! Lady Victoria Pembroke!" Victoria turned to see Lord Harrington approaching rapidly, his expression a mix of concern and disapproval. "I must go," she said urgently to Alexander. "If Lord Harrington finds us together—" "Let him," Alexander replied, sudden determination hardening his features. "I'm not ashamed to be seen with you." But Victoria was already moving away. "Goodbye, Your Grace. I wish you well in finding your practical Duchess." The pain that flashed across his face at her words almost made her turn back. But Victoria continued walking, head high, despite the tears threatening to fall. Lord Harrington reached her, breathing heavily from his exertion. "Lady Victoria, what are you doing here unaccompanied, and was that—" He glanced past her to where Alexander stood watching them. "Good God, was that Westmoreland?" "Lord Harrington," Victoria acknowledged stiffly. "I'm surprised by your concern, given your note expressing regrets regarding our association." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The situation is complex. The rumors about your mother—" "My mother is dead, sir," Victoria interrupted, "as, it seems, is your interest in me. Please don't feel obligated to escort me home. I'm quite capable of finding my way." She walked past him, her back straight and her stride purposeful, though inside her heart was breaking for what might have been, for the glimpse of connection she had felt with Alexander, now lost to caution and fear. Behind her, unseen, Alexander watched her departure with a storm of emotions playing across his features. For the first time in his adult life, the Duke of Westmoreland found himself entirely uncertain of his path forward, caught between the safety of his long-held convictions and the undeniable pull of a woman who challenged everything he thought he knew about himself. And somewhere in London, the anonymous author of Lady Whistledown's Society Papers was already dipping a quill in ink, preparing to document this latest development in the season's most compelling drama. For the game of hearts was far from over. It had merely entered a new and more dangerous phase. Alexander stood at the window of his study, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand, as rain lashed against the glass in sheets. 3 days had passed since his disastrous proposal in Hyde Park, and Victoria's words continued to haunt him. "You're still letting your parents' failures dictate your future." The accusation struck with uncomfortable precision. Was she right? Had he been hiding behind his vow, using it as a shield against the vulnerability that love demanded? A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called, not turning from the window. Simon stepped into the room, shaking rainwater from his hat. "Ghastly weather, though it matches the mood I find you in, it seems." Alexander didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the stormy London sky. "I take it your meeting with Lady Victoria didn't go as planned," Simon ventured, pouring himself a drink from the decanter on the desk. "She refused me." Simon nearly choked on his brandy. "She what? The most eligible bachelor in England, and she refused you?" "I didn't offer marriage," Alexander clarified, finally turning to face his friend. "I offered an arrangement, a union of mutual convenience." Understanding dawned on Simon's face. "Ah, and the lady wanted more. She wanted what I cannot give." "Cannot or will not?" Simon asked shrewdly. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Is there a difference?" "A profound one." Simon settled into a leather chair, studying his friend with concern. "In all the years I've known you, Alexander, I've never seen you this affected by anyone. Perhaps what you're feeling is—" "Don't say it," Alexander warned. "Love," Simon finished, ignoring the warning. "Would that be so terrible? To admit you've fallen in love with her?" Alexander returned to the window, his reflection grim in the rain-streaked glass. "Love destroyed my parents. My father died of a broken heart and wounded pride. My mother died in the bed of her latest lover in Paris. So you'll let their failures dictate your happiness?" Lady Victoria was right. Alexander's hand tightened on his glass. "Even if I were to admit such feelings, which I do not, the situation has changed. Lady Victoria was clear in her refusal. And now—" He gestured to the newspaper on his desk. Simon picked it up, scanning the latest edition of Lady Whistledown's Society Papers. His eyebrows rose as he read. Lady Victoria Pembroke, despite the cloud of scandal surrounding her parentage, was seen in intimate conversation with Lord Harrington in Hyde Park. Has the gentleman reconsidered his hasty retreat from courtship? This author notes that a marriage of damaged reputations might prove surprisingly compatible. Simon looked up. You can't possibly believe this drivel. I saw them together, Alexander said flatly. After she left me, Harrington approached her. They appeared familiar. And this bothers you because… Alexander turned, frustration evident in his expression. Because she deserves better than Harrington. The man withdrew his interest the moment scandal touched her name, only to reappear when… He stopped abruptly. When what? Simon pressed. Alexander's expression darkened. When he saw her with me. Simon set down the newspaper, his eyes thoughtful. Interesting. Almost as if someone is orchestrating events to push Lady Victoria toward a specific outcome. Lady Agatha, Alexander concluded grimly. She's been maneuvering Victoria toward Harrington from the beginning. But why? You're the more prestigious match by far. Alexander paced the study, mind racing. Unless she knew the scandal about Victoria's parentage would eventually surface. A duke might reject such a connection, but Harrington, with his own family's somewhat checkered past, might be persuaded to overlook it for the right incentive, Simon finished. The question is, what incentive? Whatever it is, I intend to find out. Alexander set down his untouched brandy with sudden resolve. And I need your help. Across London, in a significantly less elegant setting, Victoria sat in the small drawing room of her aunt's townhouse, methodically sorting through the meager collection of her mother's letters and keepsakes. Items she had never been permitted to examine closely before. The scandal, painful as it was, had provided one unexpected freedom. Lady Agatha had abandoned her vigilant monitoring of Victoria's activities, too busy crafting their social retreat to notice her niece's sudden interest in family history. Victoria unfolded a yellowed letter, her mother's delicate handwriting flowing across the page in elegant French. Though her own command of the language was imperfect, she could make out enough to understand that her mother had been corresponding with someone in Paris, someone she addressed with obvious affection. "What are you doing?" Victoria started, looking up to find Lady Agatha in the doorway, her expression suspicious. "Going through Mother's things," Victoria answered truthfully. "I thought, given the circumstances, I deserved to know more about her." Lady Agatha crossed the room swiftly, snatching the letter from Victoria's hands. "These are private correspondences, not for your eyes." "They concern my mother, and possibly my true parentage," Victoria countered, rising to face her aunt. "I have a right to know." "You have no rights beyond what I choose to grant you," Lady Agatha snapped, gathering the remaining letters. "Your mother's indiscretions are better left buried." "So there is truth to the rumors," Victoria pressed. "My father was a Frenchman." Lady Agatha's lips thinned. "Your father was the Earl of Pembroke. In name, perhaps, but not by blood." Victoria held her aunt's gaze steadily. "Was he really a spy for Napoleon?" "Don't be absurd." Lady Agatha's dismissal came too quickly. Jean-Michel was a diplomat. The accusations of espionage came later, after he had returned to France. The confirmation hung in the air between them. Jean-Michel. After years of wondering, Victoria finally had a name. "Why didn't you tell me?" Victoria asked quietly. Lady Agatha's expression hardened. "And what good would that have done? Would knowing your mother betrayed her husband and country for a French lover have made your childhood happier? Would it have improved your prospects?" "It would have given me truth," Victoria replied, "instead of a lifetime of secrets and lies. Truth is a luxury for those who can afford it," Lady Agatha said coldly. "We could not." A knock at the front door interrupted their confrontation. Moments later, the maid appeared. "Lord Harrington to see Lady Victoria, my lady." Lady Agatha's demeanor transformed instantly, a practiced smile replacing her anger. "Show him in, Mary, and bring tea." When the maid had gone, she turned back to Victoria. "Fix your hair quickly. This is a critical moment. Lord Harrington's call after the scandal shows he may still be persuaded." "I have no interest in persuading Lord Harrington," Victoria replied firmly. especially now that I know the truth you've hidden from me. Don't be a fool, Lady Agatha hissed. Harrington is your last chance at a respectable match, unless you prefer life as a governess, assuming any family would hire you with your tainted bloodline. Before Victoria could respond, Lord Harrington was announced. He entered the drawing room with careful dignity, bowing to both ladies. Lady Agatha, Lady Victoria, I hope I find you well despite the unfortunate circumstances. You're most kind to call, Lord Harrington, Lady Agatha effused. So many of our acquaintances have proven disappointingly fickle in the face of mere rumor and innuendo. Lord Harrington cleared his throat. Yes, well, one must look beyond society's superficial judgments to the character beneath, mustn't one? His gaze lingered on Victoria in a way that made her skin crawl. Assessing, proprietary, as though he were inspecting merchandise with a slight defect that might warrant a discount. Lady Victoria, he continued, I wondered if you might accompany me for a turn around your garden. The rain has stopped, and I find fresh air conducive to frank conversation. Lady Agatha nearly pushed Victoria toward him. What a splendid idea! Victoria would be delighted. Would she? Victoria murmured, but allowed herself to be led to the small garden behind the townhouse, where the recent rain had left everything glistening and fragrant. Once they were alone, though still visible from the house as propriety demanded, Lord Harrington turned to her with an expression of practiced sincerity. Lady Victoria, I must apologize for my hasty withdrawal upon hearing the rumors about your parentage. It was ungentlemanly of me. It was honest, at least, Victoria replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. You made your priorities quite clear. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I acted precipitously. Upon reflection, I realized that one's lineage is far less important than one's character, and your character, Lady Victoria, has always been beyond reproach. How generous of you to overlook my tainted blood, she said coolly. Lord Harrington blinked, taken aback by her directness. Well, yes. In fact, I've come to make you an offer. Victoria stiffened. An offer? Of marriage, he clarified, as though she might have misunderstood. Despite current circumstances, I believe we could form a successful union. My family name would provide you protection from scandal, and you would bring certain advantages to the arrangement. What advantages might those be, my lord? My charming conversation? My musical accomplishments? Or perhaps the substantial dowry my aunt has secretly promised you? Lord Harrington paled. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Victoria stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. My aunt has been pushing me toward you with unusual determination. I assumed it was merely her desperation to see me settled, but now I wonder if there wasn't a more specific arrangement. After a moment of tense silence, Lord Harrington's composure cracked. Lady Agatha approached me before the season began. She offered a dowry far exceeding what I had been led to believe the Pembroke estate could provide. In exchange, I was to court you exclusively and make an offer before the season's end. Victoria felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. And where exactly did my aunt claim this generous dowry would come from? Lord Harrington hesitated, then admitted, She mentioned funds held in trust by your mother's family in France, funds that would become accessible upon your marriage. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Lady Agatha had known all along about Victoria's true parentage and about money left by her biological father. Money she could only access through Victoria's marriage. I see, Victoria said quietly. And does my French heritage still trouble you, now that you know it comes with financial compensation? Lord Harrington had the decency to look ashamed. Lady Victoria, I admit my initial approach was influenced by practical considerations, but I have developed a genuine admiration for you. I believe we could have a comfortable life together. Comfortable, Victoria echoed. What a tepid word to build a lifetime upon. Before Lord Harrington could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a footman. Begging your pardon, my lady, my lord, the Duke of Westmoreland has called and requests an urgent audience with Lady Victoria. Victoria's heart leapt traitorously in her chest. The Duke is here? In the drawing room, my lady, with Lady Agatha. Victoria turned to Lord Harrington, who was watching her with a calculating expression. "You've developed an interesting acquaintance with Westmoreland." "The Duke has shown me kindness when others withdrew it," she replied carefully. "Nothing more." "Is that so?" Lord Harrington's voice hardened slightly. "Then you won't object to giving him your regrets while we continue our discussion." It wasn't a question, but a test. One Victoria suddenly had no interest in passing. "On the contrary, my lord, I believe the Duke's urgent business takes precedence over our garden conversation." She offered a curtsy that was just shallow enough to border on insult. "I wish you good day." Lord Harrington's face darkened. "Consider carefully, Lady Victoria. My offer may be the last you receive." Victoria met his gaze steadily. "Then I shall have to reconcile myself to spinsterhood, my lord. For I find I would rather face that fate than a lifetime with a man who had to be bribed to overlook my bloodline." Leaving him standing speechless among the rain-drenched roses, Victoria made her way back to the house, her mind racing and her heart pounding in anticipation of seeing Alexander again, and wondering what urgent matter could have brought him to her door after their painful parting in the park. Whatever it was, she sensed that the game her aunt had been playing was about to change dramatically. The only question was whether Victoria herself would emerge victorious, or become yet another casualty of secrets long buried and truths too long denied. Victoria entered the drawing room to find a tableau that would have been comical under different circumstances. Lady Agatha perched rigidly on the edge of the settee, her face a mask of barely concealed alarm, while Alexander stood by the fireplace, his tall figure radiating a controlled anger that seemed to fill the room. Simon Ellery, the Duke's closest friend, sat nearby, observing the scene with the keen interest of a man watching a particularly engaging play. All eyes turned to Victoria as she entered. "Your Grace?" She acknowledged Alexander with a small curtsy, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Lord Ellery, I understand you wish to see me urgently." Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at her. "Lady Victoria, thank you for receiving us. I apologize for interrupting your conversation with Lord Harrington." The slight emphasis he placed on conversation suggested he had his own opinions about what had transpired in the garden. "It was no interruption," Victoria assured him. "Our business was concluded." Lady Agatha rose quickly. "Lord Harrington was just about to make Victoria an offer of marriage. I'm sure he'll return shortly to complete the matter." "I'm afraid Lord Harrington's offer has been declined," Victoria said calmly. Lady Agatha's face drained of color. "You foolish girl! What have you done?" "Made a choice, Aunt. Perhaps my first truly independent one." Alexander's eyes never left Victoria's face, something like admiration flickering in their depths. "Lady Victoria, Lord Ellery and I have come across information that may be of great interest to you, information concerning your mother, and the truth about your parentage." Lady Agatha stepped forward, her voice sharp with panic. "This is a private family matter, Your Grace. It hardly requires your intervention." "On the contrary," Simon interjected smoothly, "when blackmail and fraud are involved, outside intervention becomes quite necessary." "Blackmail?" Victoria repeated. "Fraud?" Alexander nodded grimly. "May we sit?" This explanation requires some time. Once they were seated, Lady Agatha looking increasingly like a cornered animal, Alexander began. "After our conversation in the park, I found myself troubled by certain inconsistencies. Why would Lady Agatha push you toward Lord Harrington when a more prestigious match might have been possible? Why did the scandal about your parentage emerge precisely when it did? And who stood to benefit most from your social ruination?" "These seemed important questions," Simon added, "particularly when one considers the timing of it all." Victoria glanced at her aunt, whose lips had pressed into a bloodless line. "And what answers did you find?" Alexander exchanged a look with Simon before continuing. "Through certain inquiries in diplomatic circles, Lord Ellery has connections in the Foreign Office. We discovered that your mother's relationship with the French diplomat Jean-Michel Dupont was indeed real." Victoria's hands twisted in her lap. "So I am his daughter." "Yes," Alexander confirmed gently. "But the accusations that he was a spy for Napoleon were fabricated. a convenient fiction created to justify your mother's banishment to Scotland after the Earl discovered her infidelity. Jean-Michel Dupont was, in fact, a respected diplomat who remained in France during the Restoration, Simon elaborated. He died 2 years ago, leaving a substantial fortune to his only child, a daughter born in England whom he never had the opportunity to know. Victoria's eyes widened. He left me his fortune? A fortune currently held in trust by a Paris bank, Alexander confirmed. A trust that requires your signature, as his legitimate heir, to release the funds. A signature that must be witnessed by French banking officials. Lady Agatha could contain herself no longer. This is absurd. Victoria is the daughter of the Earl of Pembroke. These foreign claims are documented in letters you've kept hidden for years, Alexander interrupted coldly. Letters Lord Ellery and I have now seen copies of, provided by Monsieur Dupont's solicitor in Paris. He turned back to Victoria. Your mother maintained correspondence with your true father until her death. He never stopped trying to reach you, though Lady Agatha intercepted his letters and gifts. Victoria felt as though the room were spinning around her. But how did you discover all this in just 3 days? Alexander's expression softened. I have resources at my disposal and motivation to use them. When a woman refuses a duke's proposal, it tends to focus his attention remarkably. Despite everything, Victoria felt a blush rise to her cheeks. This still doesn't explain the blackmail Lord Ellery mentioned, she said, glancing at her aunt, who sat like stone. Simon leaned forward. The final piece fell into place this morning when we intercepted a rather revealing correspondence between Lady Agatha and a certain publisher of society papers. Victoria gasped. Lady Whistledown? Indeed, Alexander confirmed grimly. It appears your aunt has been feeding information to the author for years, including the revelation about your parentage, which she herself arranged to have published. Victoria turned to her aunt, disbelief and hurt washing over her. You orchestrated my public humiliation? But why? Why would you destroy my reputation, my chances? Lady Agatha finally spoke, her voice brittle with defensive anger. Because you were becoming too ambitious. The way you looked at the Duke as though you actually believed such a match might be possible. I had to make you understand your place. My place? Victoria repeated, stunned. A half-French nobody with a traitor's blood, Lady Agatha said brutally. That's what society would say if they knew the full truth. I protected you for years, hiding your shameful origins. And in return, I expected obedience. Harrington was willing to overlook your background for the right price, a portion of your inheritance. A portion you intended to keep for yourself, Alexander added coldly. The French solicitor confirmed that you've been corresponding with him for months, claiming to act as Victoria's guardian and negotiating your own percentage of the funds. Lady Agatha's face contorted with rage. I deserved compensation. 20 years I've housed you, clothed you, presented you to society, all while knowing the truth that could destroy us both. You weren't protecting me, Victoria realized, rising to her feet as anger replaced shock. You were protecting your access to my inheritance. You never intended for me to know about my real father or his bequest. And you never will claim it, Lady Agatha spat. The trust requires you to travel to Paris to sign the documents in person. How will you manage that? An unmarried woman with a ruined reputation and no funds for travel. You need me, Victoria. Remember that before you pass judgment on my methods. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only when Alexander stood and moved to Victoria's side. Lady Victoria doesn't need you, he said quietly. She has other options. Victoria looked up at him, hope and uncertainty warring in her expression. What options? Alexander took her hand gently in his. I came here today not only to expose Lady Agatha's deception, but to correct my own mistake. He sank to one knee before her, still holding her hand, oblivious to Lady Agatha's gasp and Simon's barely concealed smile. Victoria Pembroke, 3 days ago in the park, I offered you an arrangement when I should have offered you my heart. I told myself I was protecting us both from pain, when in truth I was simply afraid. afraid of feeling too deeply, of risking too much. Victoria's free hand flew to her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes. "You were right," Alexander continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I was letting my parents' failures dictate my future, hiding behind a wall I built long ago. But you, with your courage and your honesty, you've shown me that some walls need to fall." He drew a deep breath. "I love you, Victoria. I think I began loving you the moment you asked if I'd read Wordsworth. And if you'll have me, not as a business arrangement or a convenient solution, but as a man who loves you completely, I would be honored to call you my wife." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. "But the scandal, my parentage, mean nothing to me," Alexander assured her firmly. "I'm proud to marry the daughter of the Countess of Pembroke and Jean-Michel Dupont, and as Duchess of Westmoreland, no whisper of scandal would dare touch you." Lady Agatha made a strangled sound of outrage. "This is absurd. You can't possibly mean to marry her now that you know the truth." "On the contrary," Alexander replied, not taking his eyes from Victoria's face. "Knowing the truth only makes me more certain. The question is, what does Victoria want?" All eyes turned to her as she stood at the crossroads of her future, a future suddenly rich with possibilities she had never dared imagine. Victoria looked down at Alexander, still kneeling before her, his usually guarded expression now open and vulnerable. She thought of all he had done to uncover the truth, to give her back the story of her origins, to offer her not just security, but love. "Yes," she said softly, then with growing conviction. "Yes, Alexander, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough to any doubts that might have lingered in her heart. He rose and gathered her hands in his, bringing them to his lips. "You've made me the happiest of men," he murmured against her fingers. "This is outrageous," Lady Agatha sputtered. "I am still Victoria's guardian. I forbid this match." Simon cleared his throat. "Actually, Lady Agatha, you may wish to consider your position carefully. The evidence of your attempted fraud against your niece, not to mention your collusion in spreading malicious falsehoods through Lady Whistledown's papers, would make fascinating reading for the magistrate. Not to mention the ton." Lady Agatha blanched. "You wouldn't dare." "He wouldn't," Alexander agreed pleasantly, "but I most certainly would. Unless, of course, you were to withdraw any objection to our marriage and sign the necessary guardianship papers transferring Victoria's care to my mother's sister, the Dowager Countess of Beverley, until our wedding. And," Victoria added, finding her voice and her courage, "you will provide me with all of my mother's letters and keepsakes. Everything that rightfully belongs to me." Lady Agatha looked from one resolute face to another, realizing she had been outmaneuvered. With ill grace, she gave a curt nod. "Very well, but don't expect me to attend the wedding. The sight of you marrying above your station would be too much to bear." "Your absence will be the greatest gift you could give us," Victoria replied with newfound confidence. As Lady Agatha swept from the room, Simon rose and clapped Alexander on the shoulder. "I believe my work here is done. I'll wait in the carriage, old friend. Take your time saying goodbye to your fiancé." When they were alone, Alexander drew Victoria into his arms, his expression tender and slightly wondering. "I can scarcely believe you said yes. Did you think I wouldn't? After the abysmal way I proposed the first time? I wouldn't have blamed you for sending me away." Victoria smiled up at him. "You came back. You fought for the truth. You fought for me. And I always will," he promised, bending to press his forehead against hers. "No more walls between us, Victoria. No more fears of the past. Only the future," she whispered. "Our future." As his lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their promise more effectively than any words could have done, Victoria knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, society's judgment, her journey to claim her inheritance, the inevitable adjustments of their new life together, they would face them not as duke and debutante, but as partners who had chosen love over fear, truth over convenience, and each other above all else. And somewhere in London, Lady Whistledown was about to receive the most unexpected story of the season. one that would transform a scandal into a romance for the ages. The wedding of the Duke of Westmoreland to Lady Victoria Pembroke was by all accounts the event of the season, perhaps even the decade. St. George's Church in Hanover Square had never witnessed such a gathering of nobility and gentry. Their curiosity about the match that had scandalized and then captivated London society, outweighing any lingering whispers about the bride's parentage. "I still can't quite believe it," Victoria whispered, standing just outside the church doors in a gown of ivory silk and Alençon lace, her arm linked through Simon Ellery's. In the absence of any male relatives, Simon had offered to give her away, a gesture that had cemented his place in her affections permanently. "That you're marrying the most eligible bachelor in England, or that half the ton actually accepted their invitations?" Simon teased, patting her trembling hand. "Both," Victoria admitted with a small laugh. "3 weeks ago, I was a social pariah. Now I'm about to become a duchess." "A transformation worthy of a fairy tale," Simon agreed. "Though I suspect it's less the title and more the man holding it that has you glowing like a candle." Victoria's smile softened. "He's nothing like I expected when we first met. Beneath all that ducal reserve is a man who moved heaven and earth to win you," Simon finished. "I've known Alexander since we were boys, and I've never seen him fight for anything the way he fought for you." The organ music swelled from within the church, signaling that the moment had arrived. Victoria took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Ready to scandalize society one last time?" Simon asked with a conspiratorial wink. Victoria's chin lifted with the quiet confidence she had discovered in herself through the tumultuous events of the past month. "Absolutely." As they proceeded down the aisle, Victoria was conscious of the hundreds of eyes upon her, some warm with approval, others narrowed in judgment or envy. But the only gaze that mattered was waiting at the altar. Alexander, resplendent in formal attire, watching her approach with such naked adoration that a murmur rippled through the congregation. Never had the ton seen the austere Duke of Westmoreland look so utterly, vulnerably human. When she reached him and Simon placed her hand in his, Alexander leaned close to whisper, "You're trembling." "With happiness," she assured him, "and perhaps a touch of disbelief that we actually managed to arrange a society wedding in 3 weeks. When a duke is motivated, miracles become merely logistics," he replied with the hint of a smile that was reserved for her alone. As they exchanged their vows before God and society, Victoria felt the weight of her past, the secrets, the shame, the uncertainty, lifting from her shoulders. In its place settled the comforting mantle of a future built on truth, mutual respect, and a love neither of them had sought, but both had embraced with increasing courage. The wedding breakfast that followed at Westmoreland House was a spectacle of elegance and abundance, with Alexander's staff outdoing themselves to create a celebration worthy of their master's unexpected joy. Victoria moved through the crowd of well-wishers with growing confidence, her new title sitting more comfortably on her shoulders with each passing hour. "Your Grace," came a familiar voice behind her, the form of address still strange to her ears. Victoria turned to find the Dowager Countess of Beverley, Alexander's aunt and her temporary guardian for the brief period before the wedding, approaching with a warm smile. "Aunt Eleanor," Victoria greeted her, having quickly adopted the familial term at the older woman's insistence. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" "More than satisfactory, my dear. It's positively triumphant." The Dowager Countess, a handsome woman in her 60s with Alexander's same penetrating gray eyes, took Victoria's hands in hers. "I never thought I'd see the day my nephew abandoned his ridiculous vow against marriage. You've accomplished what an army of matchmaking mamas failed to do for a decade." Victoria laughed softly. "I assure you, it wasn't by design. The best things rarely are." Aunt Eleanor's expression grew more serious. "I knew his mother, my sister, better than most. She would have been overjoyed to see him find what she never did, a love built on substance rather than fleeting passion." Before Victoria could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected guest, Lord Harrington, looking somewhat uncomfortable but determined. "Lady Victoria, forgive me, Your Grace," he corrected himself with a slight bow. "I hope my presence is not unwelcome. The invitation was unexpected. Yet you accepted it, Victoria observed neutrally. Lord Harrington shifted his weight. I felt I owed it to you, to both of you, to offer my congratulations in person. And perhaps my apology as well. Victoria studied him for a moment, then nodded graciously. Your wishes are received in the spirit they're offered, my lord. The Duke is a fortunate man, Harrington added, with what appeared to be genuine sincerity. I realize now I never truly saw you, Lady Victoria. Not as he does. As Lord Harrington moved away, Aunt Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Magnanimous of you to include him. It was Alexander's suggestion, actually, Victoria confided. He said something about victory being sweeter when witnessed by those who doubted its possibility. The Dowager Countess laughed delightedly. My nephew has a streak of delicious vengeance I've always rather admired. You complement each other well, your compassion softening his harder edges, his strength supporting your gentle nature. Victoria's eyes sought Alexander across the room, finding him deep in conversation with a group of gentlemen. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his expression warming instantly upon meeting her eyes. Yes, she agreed softly. I believe we do. Later that evening, as the celebration continued below, Victoria stood in her new chambers at Westmoreland House. A suite of rooms Alexander had ordered completely refurbished in shades of blue and silver that complemented her eyes. Her lady's maid had just helped her change from her wedding gown into a nightdress of whisper-thin silk and lace, then discreetly withdrawn. Now, alone in this elegant space that was to be her sanctuary in her new life, Victoria felt a curious mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The door connecting her rooms to Alexander's opened, and he appeared, having shed his formal attire for a dressing gown of dark blue brocade. May I come in? He asked, his voice gentle. Victoria nodded, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had already shared in words and emotions, if not yet in body. Alexander crossed to where she stood by the window, taking her hands in his. Are you happy, Victoria? Incomparably so, she assured him, though I confess to some nervousness about what comes next. A tender smile touched his lips. We have the rest of our lives for what comes next. Tonight I'm content simply to hold my wife and marvel at the fact that you agreed to become mine. Relief and love washed over Victoria in equal measure. I have something for you, she said, moving to her dressing table and retrieving a small package wrapped in silver paper. A wedding gift. Alexander accepted it with a raised eyebrow. I thought it was the groom who traditionally gave gifts on the wedding night. Consider it a correction of tradition, Victoria replied with a smile. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small leather-bound volume of poetry. A first edition of Wordsworth's Lyrical Ballads. The beginning of our connection, he murmured, tracing the gilt lettering on the cover. How did you find this? Simon helped me, Victoria admitted. He said you've been searching for a first edition for years. Alexander looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. It's perfect, though not as perfect as what you've already given me. And what is that? A reason to break my vow, he said simply. A future I never dared imagine. He drew her into his arms, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that had been building between them since their first meeting. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Duchess, he whispered, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Victoria replied, her heart full to bursting with the knowledge that this was only the beginning of their story. My Duke, who vowed never to love until it was too late. Outside the windows of Westmoreland House, London continued its eternal dance of ambition, scandal, and social climbing. But within the walls of their private chambers, a duke and his unexpected duchess had created a sanctuary where love, honest, hard-won, and all the stronger for the obstacles it had overcome, reigned supreme. And in the years to come, when the Ton whispered about the transformation of London's most confirmed bachelor into its most devoted husband, those closest to the couple would smile knowingly, for they understood what society never fully grasped. That the greatest victories aren't won on ballroom floors or in gossip columns, but in the quiet surrender of two hearts brave enough to risk everything for the promise of love. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the breakfast room at Westmoreland House, gilding Victoria's hair as she sat reading the latest edition of Lady Whistledown's society papers. Across the table, Alexander watched her with unabashed adoration, still finding it remarkable how thoroughly his life had changed in the space of a year. "Anything of interest?" he inquired, sipping his coffee. Victoria's lips curved in amusement. "Lady Whistledown seems positively bereft without our drama to report on. She's reduced to speculating about Lord Pemberton's financial troubles and Lady Jersey's new French modiste. How the mighty have fallen," Alexander remarked dryly. "Though I confess I don't miss being the subject of her scrutiny." "Nor I," Victoria agreed, setting aside the paper. "Though we still generate our share of gossip, I fear. Lady Hartington commented at last night's soirée that we are disgracefully enamored for a couple married nearly a year." Alexander's eyebrow arched. "And what did my disgracefully enamored Duchess reply?" "That some fortunes improve with time, unlike her ladyship's unfortunate choice in turbans." A laugh escaped Alexander, the kind of unreserved, joyful sound that had once been rare from him, but now came frequently. "You've developed quite the sharp tongue, my love." "I've had excellent tutelage in navigating society," Victoria replied, her eyes sparkling. "Between you and Aunt Eleanor, I've learned that the best defense against gossip is to be unapologetically content in one's choices." "And are you? Content?" The question was asked lightly, but Victoria recognized the shadow of his old insecurities, the lingering fear that happiness might be fleeting, that he might somehow fail her as his father had failed his mother. Rising from her chair, Victoria moved to his side of the table, perching herself on his lap with a familiarity that still thrilled them both. "Alexander Blackwood, I am so far beyond mere contentment that there isn't a word in English poetry adequate to express it." He smiled against her hair. "Perhaps we should consult the French. They're notoriously better at matters of the heart." "Speaking of French matters," Victoria said, her expression growing more serious, "I've had a letter from Monsieur Baudelaire." Alexander's arms tightened slightly around her waist. "Your father's solicitor? What news from Paris?" "The final transfer of funds is complete. My inheritance is now fully settled." She hesitated, then continued. "He also sent another packet of my mother's letters to Jean-Michel. I read them last night while you were at your club." "And?" "They loved each other, Alexander. Truly and deeply, despite everything that separated them. It wasn't just a fleeting affair or a political intrigue as society painted it. In another world, another time, they might have found their happy ending," Alexander finished gently, "as we found ours." Victoria nodded, emotion making her voice husky. "It makes me all the more grateful for what we have, for the freedom to love openly, without shame or separation." Alexander brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "What do you wish to do with your inheritance? It's a substantial sum, entirely yours to command." "I've been thinking about that." Victoria straightened, her expression brightening. "I want to establish a foundation for education and support of young women without means or family connection. Girls like I might have been, had circumstances been different." Pride bloomed in Alexander's chest. In the year since their marriage, he had watched Victoria grow ever more confident in her position, using her influence and resources not for mere social advancement, but to effect genuine change in the lives of those less fortunate. "A noble purpose," he approved, "and very much in keeping with your character." "There's something else," Victoria added, a hint of nervousness entering her voice. "Something I haven't yet told you." Alexander's brow furrowed slightly. "What is it?" Taking his hand, Victoria placed it gently against her still flat stomach, her eyes never leaving his face. "Our family is about to increase, Your Grace. By Christmas, you will be a father." For a moment, Alexander went utterly still, his expression frozen in shock. Then, as the meaning of her words penetrated, his face transformed, with a joy so pure it brought tears to Victoria's eyes. "A child," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." Victoria nodded, her own tears falling freely now. Dr. Winters confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be certain before I told you. In one fluid movement, Alexander stood, lifting Victoria in his arms and spinning her around the breakfast room, his laughter mingling with hers in a symphony of shared happiness. "Careful," she protested through her giggles. "The heir to Westmoreland might object to such exuberance." "The heir, or perhaps heiress, to Westmoreland will have to become accustomed to a father who expresses his emotions freely," Alexander countered, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "At least in the privacy of his home, with those he loves most in the world." Victoria leaned into his embrace, marveling at how far they had both come from their first meeting. She, the scandal-shadowed debutante with a secret lineage. He, the Duke who had sworn never to love. Now they stood together, stronger for the challenges they had faced, their hearts open to a future neither could have imagined a year ago. "I love you, Alexander," she whispered against his chest. "With every beat of my heart." "And I love you," he replied, his voice steady with the certainty of a vow that, unlike his first, he intended to keep for all the days of his life. "My Duchess, my love, my home." As they stood together in the golden morning light, the Duke of Westmoreland and his bride had become living proof that the most powerful magic in the world wasn't found in fairy tales or society papers, but in the simple, profound courage to choose love, even when, especially when, it arrived in the most unexpected of packages. And in the years to come, as their family grew and their love deepened, they would often look back on that season of scandal and secrets with gratitude. For it had taught them both that the greatest adventures begin not when we follow society's carefully prescribed paths, but when we dare to write our own story, heart first, consequences be damned. For what is life, after all, without the risk of love? And what is love without the promise of forever? Dear reader, love often finds us when we're least expecting it, and sometimes when we're actively avoiding it. As we've seen with Alexander and Victoria, the walls we build to protect ourselves can become the very prisons that keep us from experiencing life's greatest joy. Their journey reminds us that true love isn't about finding someone perfect, but finding someone who sees past our imperfections to the truth of who we are. It teaches us that our pasts, with all their complications and scandals, don't define our futures unless we allow them to. If you enjoyed this tale of healing, redemption, and the courage to love despite fear, I invite you to subscribe to my channel for more stories that will warm your heart and perhaps encourage you to take risks of your own. Like, comment, and share with others who might need a reminder that love, in the end, is always worth the gamble. Until our next literary adventure together, with warmest regards, your storyteller.